Tonight we turn to the state that has become America's political laboratory, North Carolina, where every election now feels like a stress test for the future of our democracy. On this past Tuesday night, Tar Heel voters didn't just choose nominees, they sketched the first outlines of the 2026 midterms. Who might control the United States Senate? Whether a redrawn congressional map reshapes the state's last true swing district, and whether the governor can hold the line against the legislature determined to run the table. At the top of the ballot, Republicans have rallied behind former RNC chair Michael Whatley, setting up a blockbuster showdown with Democrat Roy Cooper, the beloved former governor. A race already shaping up to be one of the most expensive bare-knuckle Senate battles in American history. If you want to know who sets the agenda in Washington in 2027, keep your eyes on Raleigh and Charlotte. But power in North Carolina isn't just about the Senate. In State Senate District 26, the question is, who truly governs the state of North Carolina, the governor or legislative leaders who've dominated the map for more than a decade? And in the newly engineered 1st Congressional District, Republicans believe they have their best shot in generations to pry away the state's only swing seat from Democrat Don Davis. And then there's another fight, one happening far from the campaign trail. A federal judge has declined to restore early voting sites to the campuses of Western North Carolina, UNC-Greensboro, and North Carolina A&T, the largest historically Black university in the country. That means thousands of students now have to travel farther, spend more, and work harder just to cast the same ballot others drop off down the street. The legal debate talks about logistics, but the real question is simpler. Who gets access to the ballot and who faces obstacles along the way? So tonight we ask, is North Carolina still just a battleground state, or has it become the blueprint of how political power is won, protected, and contested in modern America? Joining me tonight is Wesley Harris, chair of the Mecklenburg County Democratic Party, on the ground in one of the fastest growing and most politically competitive counties in the country. He's going to help us unpack what Tuesday night's results tell us about 2026, about the national political climate, and about whether North Carolina students and working class voters will simply ride along or help steer the direction of this democracy. Mr. Harris, thank you for being a part of the political mic tonight.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Was it people outside North Carolina who just saw a crawl of results Tuesday night? What's the one story buried in those numbers that actually tells us where this state and maybe the country is headed?
I think it's enthusiasm and excitement on the Democratic side. Like you said in your intro, I think North Carolina is both. I think it is one of the last true swing states in the country, but it also is a laboratory of what happens if you lose control over that. And I think that's what's at the forefront. So in our primary on Tuesday, what you saw was a myriad of incumbents go down across the board, both in the Democratic primary and in the Republican primary. On the Democratic primary, it was a lot of the particularly House representatives who, again, I used to serve in the North Carolina House, and so I knew all of them very well, but who voted with the Republicans more often than not, particularly on budget issues, and this last term to override Governor Stein's vetoes on some very harmful pieces of legislation. And there were shockwaves across the state when those vetoes were overridden, and it ignited an excitement in the base voters here. And so I think what you saw in North Carolina was exceptionally high turnout. Just in Mecklenburg County, we had 20,000 more Democratic ballots pulled in Mecklenburg County for the midterm primary than we did 2 years prior for the presidential primary, which is absolutely incredible. And so I think you saw a lot of fired up folks on both sides who are looking for change, and they're looking to make sure that we can kind of hold the line with what we have going on the federal level, which again, here in North Carolina, we're kind of a leading indicator for what everyone's trying on the federal level. They've tried in North Carolina first. And so really the future of kind of our entire democracy hinges on what the Democrats are able to do in North Carolina, because Republicans do have full control. And so if we want to bring balance back to our state government and our federal government, it depends on what Democrats are going to do in North Carolina. And so I think all eyes should be on this state, because we really do hold the keys to what can be done, nationwide.
Now, Wesley, I alluded to it at the introduction, but Judge William Osteen Jr. refused to require early voting sites on the campuses of North Carolina A&T State University, University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and Western Carolina University. On paper, the ruling talks about logistics, but in the real world, that means thousands of students now have to leave campus just to vote. So let me ask you this plainly. Is this a neutral administrative decision, or is it effectively a new barrier to the ballot for young North Carolina voters?
It's certainly a barrier to making people voting, particularly because all of these sites were sites that have been used for multiple periods before. And when reading the judgment, I don't think it's the end all be all judgment, because a lot of the arguments were process stories of there wasn't time to make this decision before early vote started, because the decision came down in early February. Early vote started in the second week of February, and as somebody who works regularly with Board of Elections, these sites are decided kind of months ahead of time, and so this has been brewing. The good news is that there's still time to get this hearing through, because it again, the ruling talked about, well, you have to, you're just saying you wanted them in these areas, but we don't know if they're actually allow voting in these areas, and so there's enough time for the plaintiffs in this case to get the information that they need to have a much better case in the court, because the only thing that was struck down was an emergency injunction, and so the case is still being heard. And so I'm hopeful. I'm not going to say I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful that they can do it. And one of the difficulties is election law is administered by the states, and Republicans have completely taken over our state judiciary. Of the Court of Appeals, of the 15 seats on the Court of Appeals, only 3 are Democrats. All 3 of those are up for re-election this year. On our Supreme Court, we only have two Democrats out of 9, and so that's terrible. And one of them is up for re-election this year. And so we're having to do it at the federal court. And so the federal court is much more difficult because states do administer our election laws. And so you have to prove that is a constitutional violation to get the federal court to intervene, which, again, I think it is, because everyone has free access to the right to vote. And so I'm hopeful that we can get this through as time goes on. I know we have some really great lawyers working on it. And if it's not, then we just have to work around it. We have to that means we have to mobilize earlier. We have to get rides to the polls. We have to make sure that we register students on campus earlier, make sure that they have the information that they need, make sure that we get them to the polls ahead of time. And we're just going to have to jump our infrastructure up in time. But it is an attempt to silence voters. And it is an abridgment of our rights to have easy access to voters. And so I hope the judicial system does the right thing, but if they don't, we need to be prepared and be able to do what needs to be done to make sure those folks can vote.
And Judge William Osteen Jr. framed his decision as a matter of quote unquote reasonable circumstances around voting locations. But when you remove early voting sites from campuses like North Carolina A&T, University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and Western Carolina University, what does that actually do to the cost of voting for young people, not legally, but practically?
It certainly increases it. And we have the same situation here in Mecklenburg County. We have a huge university, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And, in 2020, we had voting on campus. And in 2024, we had voting on campus. And so TBD, if we're going to be able to do that, like I said, there are some legitimate logistical challenges to making sure, because we do have to rent the space. And if we're using it for voting, that means the university can't use it. And so it makes it harder to vote. And anything that increases the cost of something is going to lower the outcome of something. My background is as an economist. And if you increase costs and you don't increase benefits, then the outcome's going to fall. And so, again, if we want to make it easier for people to vote, they need to vote. And Republicans like to use the example that they used in Georgia of when they had record turnout in the 2022 elections and the 2024 elections. See, this is clearly not voter suppression because voters turning out. And that's just the enthusiasm. And just because voting goes up or down doesn't mean that there is or isn't voter suppression. But if you just look at what's happening, if it is harder to vote this year than it was last year and nothing else has changed, that's voter suppression. And we need to make sure that we're making it as easy as possible and easier every year to vote, just so we help people expand the franchise as much as possible. But absolutely, anything that increases the cost of voting is a barrier to voting, and we need to make sure that we do whatever we can to bring those down.
And of course, after this past Tuesday night, no real surprises in that Senate race so far. You've got former RNC Chair Michael Whatley coming out of the GOP primary, and then the former governor, Roy Cooper, on the Democratic side. Two guys who know the machinery of politics inside and out. Who actually has the tougher road in a state that swings as hard as North Carolina does?
I think Michael Whatley is going to have a very tough time this year, just because it's a wave election year. Every data point has pointed towards unaffiliated breaking very hard towards Democrats this year. Again, it's still going to be exceptionally hard for a Democrat to win statewide, but if anyone can do it, it's the man who's literally never lost a statewide race in North Carolina. And so Roy Cooper is very good. And, as I tell folks, when I was in the legislature and, all my colleagues were worried about what attack ads they were going to run against them, the best antidote to any attack ad is that people have to know you. And if people know you, attack ads do nothing because people know that they're false. And Roy Cooper has been a statewide elected official from 2001 until 2025. People know what Roy Cooper stands for. People know Roy Cooper's temperament. People know Roy Cooper's personality. People know Roy Cooper's results. And no amount of campaign spending on attack ads is going to be able to change that. And so I think it's going to be really hard. You can already see what their strategy is going to be to try to paint Roy Cooper as some woke curmudgeon of the left that's going to come up there and side with the most liberal members of the Senate when there's literally 40 years of results, because he was in the state legislature before that. 40 years of government service that has shown that he is nowhere close to what they're trying to make him out to be. And most North Carolinians know that. And so I think it's going to be very hard for them to paint that. And Roy Cooper's going to have an awful lot of money. This is going to be probably the first $1 billion Senate race. Roy Cooper will not be wanting for money. And again, people are angry. And when you're angry, you take it out on the administration that's in power, and that's the Republicans and Donald Trump, because he has done nothing for any of his promises. Things are more expensive now than when he took office. There's more chaos now when they went office. He ran on ending wars. I think we're in our 5th war now since he's taken office again. And so and it's all distractions from people's day-to-day lives are getting harder and harder, and our government is doing nothing to solve them. And that's what Roy Cooper's running on. He's running on, I actually want to go up to D.C. and do what I've done my entire career in public service, and that's work for the people and get things done and make people's lives easier. And I think that is going to be a message that is going to resonate exceptionally well with voters. And the Republicans aren't going to offer anything other than trying to demonize who Roy, trying to tell people, trying to spend $1 billion over the next 8 months, telling people not to trust their lying eyes. And I simply don't think it's going to work.
It's interesting because I've already seen the discipline of Roy Cooper. Whenever he's asked about the national implications of his race, he always brings it right back to his opponent, Michael Whatley. His first interview following his clinching of the nomination this past Tuesday, it was apparent that this is someone who knows exactly how to target North Carolina voters by avoiding the national discussion, by avoiding allowing himself to be thrown into the pool of national Democrats, of Washington, D.C. Democrats, even his framing of him being against Washington insiders. All of that is carefully tailored language that to allude to the fact that he's very aware of the temperature of North Carolina and the voters and what they're looking for. But you have experience running during a Trump election. Last time I saw in person, you were running for North Carolina treasurer. And that was the year, of course, Donald Trump won his second term. I remember the attack ads about you when they tried to paint you as a career politician. If you zoom out of the horse race for a second, does this Senate race look more like a nationalized Trump-era campaign, or is North Carolina still a place where local credibility and retail politics can move votes?
Retail politics does matter, but it is 100% going to be a national election, just because the balance of power is going to hinge on this race. And we have a couple, House races. Again, they tried to gerrymander Don Davis out of a seat, but we're actually got a really great shot to flip District 11 in the western part of the state, which again, Jamie Yeager just won that nomination. His family's been there since the Revolution, and a farmer, former military person, and so someone well suited for that. And so I think he's going to have a great position because the Trump government has completely dismantled FEMA and left Western North Carolina just begging for recovery aid after Helene. And so there's a huge opportunity there of just a lot of folks who are angry at the federal government. But again, Roy, it is going to be some retail politics, but it is going to be nationalized. And that's what's really hard. Again, for my race, when I was running for treasurer, again, we won 6 races statewide. Democrats won 6 statewide races in 2024. But to do that, two things had to happen. They had to outspend their opponents a minimum of 5-1, and two, run against just a really terrible candidate on the Republican side, because it took that much money to break through the noise. And again, just my race in particular, again, I wasn't able to pull it off because I ran against Michael Bloomberg's money manager, and he had a whole lot more money than I did, and so he was able to put TV ads on in every single media market in the state, and I wasn't, and so he was able to get his message out. And so when you have that much, and that's what really these national elections do to local politics, of it makes it so much harder to break through the noise on these down ballot races. And so I think that's a challenge. The fact that this is the midterm election, I think, is going to help that, because there's no presidential election, there's no gubernatorial election. This is the main one, and so I think that'll help kind of isolate it. But also, there were 7 swing states in 2024, and now there's maybe 3 Senate swing states. And so all those microscopes are going to be even more honed in on North Carolina. You're going to see money from all over the place flying into this state. So it will be. I'll say it's going to be nationalized with a little bit of local flair, and of course it's going to be nationalized. Michael Whatley's been in D.C. for longer than he's been in North Carolina the last 6 years, and so he doesn't know what's going on the ground in North Carolina, and that again gives Roy Cooper a huge opportunity and a huge boost.
Was it a relief to you and other Democrats in the state that Laura Trump wasn't going to throw her hat into the ring? I know for a little bit that was there was a little bit about a buzz surrounding the possibility of Donald Trump having his daughter-in-law enter this race and it be a Trump versus Cooper race. What were your thoughts on that?
I mean, it was, I don't think anyone really thought she was going to do it that much, and it's someone who really has no. It would have been similar to kind of like when Elizabeth Dole ran for Senate, of someone who had roots in North Carolina for sure, but then left for a long time. And obviously when Liddy came back, she was able to win. And so that name power and the Trump magic of getting turnout up is always good. But also it would have been a huge number of ways we could have been like someone who hasn't been here for the last 20 years. And North Carolina is a very different state. And so it would have been certainly a different race. I think we were all pretty surprised when Trump put all of his support behind Michael Whatley, because Michael Whatley has never run for anything. He's a lifelong political activist and behind the scenes person, but never actually been that first person on camera in front of everything. So not quite as polished of a politician as everybody else, because it does, it takes time to become comfortable on the campaign trail versus being the person behind making all the phone calls and shaking people down for stuff. And so there's certainly going to be a learning curve for Whatley, and I think that's a benefit for Trump as well. And it's someone who people don't really know. And on the political sphere, when there's this much money, if people don't know you, you can define who that person is pretty easily. And again, that's the difficulty Republicans are going to have with Roy Cooper, because people do know him. And that's a benefit that we have of Michael Whatley, of no one knows who he is. So we can tell folks who he is. They're going to try to change his narrative and try to change his bio, but we know what he's done for his entire career in politics. And it's not worked for the people. It's worked for the corporations. It's working for the special interest groups. And I think the voters are gonna find that out very quickly.
And that seems to be a theme in this election, a populist theme. I remember even Steve Bannon a couple of years back referring to the fact that if MAGA is going to be defeated by another rival movement, it would be one in which it will be a movement that's focused on those at the top versus those at the bottom, an economic populist message. When you hear folks across the country, James Talarico in Texas, when you hear, other, key figures running for their respective in Congress or even the state house, that seems to be a central theme. I know a lot of the punditry is focused on affordability, but a lot of it is also tied to the fact that people don't want to feel as if they're paying more taxes at the expense. I mean, because there's some rich person in Washington or some insider or someone who's got Trump's ear who's taking a kickback at their expense. Has Roy Cooper tapped into that artfully, in your view? And not just Roy Cooper, but other candidates up and down the ballot in North Carolina, particularly in Mecklenburg County?
Yeah, I mean, they're starting to. Roy Cooper's about to start his Make Stuff Cost Less tour, going around the state. But And Bannon's absolutely correct. The only way, again, the best way to beat populism is to never have populism happen. But once it does take a foothold, again, populism is pretty good because it is, the popular will. But it also has some dangerous aspects, which we're seeing in MAGA right now. It's easy to get a crowd riled up and get them to go along with almost anything. But the only way to beat populism is also with other populism. And if we're looking at kind of a historical perspective, this is almost exactly what happened at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, as the rise of the corporations and the end of the Gilded Age and the rise of our first populist movement. Because this is what it was. It was a huge concentration of wealth. It was a lot of folks that felt like they were being left behind and they didn't have the power. And you saw that rise with William Jennings Bryan and the Democrats putting together that Western coalition and of farmers and low slumlords of the low tenement livers in the cities. But then it was really taken on by Teddy Roosevelt and really expanded through there. And so that's what we have to do. Like if we're not taking quotes directly from Teddy Roosevelt about building a fair deal, we're missing the moment that we're in, because that's what's happened. If we're still trying to do the playbook of Barack Obama from 2008 and 2012, it's just a different world than it was right now. I think we're still just really misunderstanding the emotional impacts and the emotional toll that both the Great Recession and COVID has had on the populace, and what our shifting economy has had on the populace. There are so many people that feel like they're being left behind. And when you feel like you're being left behind, you get angry. And you get angry and you start siding with whoever sounds like they get what you're saying. Again, I think one of the big flaws of Democrats is we think that the long moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, and the long moral arc of the universe does bend towards justice, but it isn't a straight line. People are as good as the economy allows them to be. And we thought when we elected Barack Obama that we were in a post-racial America, and that as things continues, that we're going to be more socially progressive now than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And we've regressed. And we've regressed because the economy has not been good. It is hard enough to make social change when everything is going right on the best of times. It is almost impossible to make social change, positive social change, when the economy is not doing well. It's no coincidence that in the 1950s and 1960s was when we really saw the civil rights movement and the environmental movement take shape, because that was also the period where we had the largest middle class in U.S. history and world history. And people have to be economically comfortable to stop viewing others as others, to stop viewing opportunity as a zero-sum game of, I'm not going to help this other group succeed when I'm struggling myself. Like, I need to take care of myself first. And that's what I think has happened over the last 10 years with the Great Recession, with COVID. We've seen rich people get richer. We've seen the middle class be squeezed, and we've seen the bottom rung have it difficult to afford everything. And so that makes people turn inward very quickly. And when you turn inward, you don't care about other groups. You care about yourself first. And so if we want to get us back to the country that we know we can be, we have to solve this economic problem first. And to solve this economic problem first, we have to focus on the people who are hurting, the people who are being left behind, and properly diagnose why they're being left behind. Again, Trump has ID'd the right problems, but he has the wrong solutions. He knows people are being left behind. He knows they're upset. He knows they're angry. He's blaming trade and he's blaming immigrants. And that's none of those reasons are why things are going bad for folks. They're going bad for folks because competition is gone in our economy. Almost every single industry is run by one or two giant corporations that are raising prices and raising profits at the same time, because there's no competition keeping things in check. And so we need a government that is going to stand up for the people. We need a government that is going to give a fair deal for the people. And we need fighters who are going to go up there and stand up for the special interests. And I think Roy Cooper is really tapping into that frustration, tapping into that anger, tapping into that avenue, which I think is going to make him very successful in this election. And he actually knows how to get things done. And so I trust he is going to be a very effective senator once he gets up to D.C.
I'm glad you brought up the 1896 election between William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley, because there's so many apt comparisons. When you look at what William Jennings Bryan, this is someone who not only was a brilliant orator, where folks literally paid money just to hear him speak, but this was someone who understood how to tap into the common man's grievance.
Right.
The fact that he felt like he was being taken advantage of. On the flip side, you had the robber barons, the captains of industry, literally paying for the campaign of William McKinley. And so that was their avatar, someone who was going to ease back regulations, someone who was going to look the other way when it came down to the consolidation of monopolies, to allow them to continue to have free reign for for more years. You compare that to now, and you have, of course, a party in Donald Trump's Republican Party that has imposed tariffs, that's made it harder for the average American worker to be able to afford regular goods. We have made ourselves a pariah on the world stage, whether it be cutting ties with our allies, whether it be the abrupt halt of our trade as it was with Canada and Mexico. Even unemployment levels have risen again. You look at the fact that gas prices are starting to climb back up as a result of what just took place with the recent airstrikes that have resulted in the death of the Ayatollah. Before that, people were saying, well, Trump may be a jerk and ICE may be detaining folks without due process and shipping them to faraway lands and in private rooms. But hey, look at the price of gas. Well, that argument has now been pulled from under them. And in the midst of all of this, there's a sense of hypocrisy because under President Biden, when you look at just the raw numbers, unemployment was better. The crime rate was at a 50-year low. The housing market was climbing back up again. Inflation was climbing down, getting under control. But it seems as if the Democrats are not arguing. They're not pushing that message. They're not saying, when we had the House of Representatives, when we had the presidency, when we had the Senate, things were better off. They're kind of still operating from a position of weakness, despite the fact that the president's polling in the 30s, despite the fact that people are souring on him, even in the Republican Party. Right. You have disarray even in his administration. Just today, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem has been ousted from her post. Yep. That came as a result of constant negative press that she's been receiving as a result of these ICE engagements with American citizens. By every metric, the Republican Party looks like it's in for a huge beating, but yet Democrats seem very timid in how they're trying to frame their messaging as we're heading closer to the general election. Right. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and so the one thing I'll say is that I don't think we're ever gonna do better by saying things are so much better under Biden, just because people were upset. Again, like we're seeing this back and forth go on since Trump, Biden, Trump, back to Trump. It's because no one's actually solving these problems, and things aren't great. Again, like we tried that when Biden was in office. We tried running on Bidenomics and trying to hit people with those macro things, and this is kind of the difference of what's kind of the political economy of this is like on the surface, the economy looks great. Stock market's booming, corporate profits are booming, wages are actually going up, but on the surface, it's not great because costs are rising. That was the same thing that's happening under the Biden administration. Like the top numbers looked good, but people were struggling. And I kind of view the economy as like when you're talking about the economy as the weather. You can't tell somebody the weather is good, or you can't tell somebody the weather is bad when they look out their own window and they don't see that. And so if you have to tell somebody the economy was good, or if you have to tell somebody the economy was better, then it's not. Those are self-evident things. And I think the problem that we have is we just have to focus our message of we are fighting 100 front wars right now, and you cannot win a 100 front war of, everything that comes up is they're throwing all these things at us as distractions. The Epstein files, again, immigration has been awful. It's also still the least popular issue that we have. And then you have Israel and Palestine and the everything that's going on in Gaza that's tearing apart like our party of how people are going. And so we just have to be focused and realize that at the end of the day, people care about their own lives. And if you're trying to point to every single point of chaos that's going on, you're just going to be like, people are just going to tune out. And they're going to be like, they don't get it. They don't get it. Like it's got to be simplified. It's got to be focused. And that's why I think focusing on affordability is going to be the critical piece. And we need to come up with practical solutions for it, because that's ultimately what's going to happen. And, we have to understand that we have to govern. And to govern, that means we have to win, and we have to win big. Not just taking the House, not just taking the presidency, but we got to break the logjam in the U.S. Senate. And again, that's why I think North Carolina is so critically important this year, because for us to not only win, but to govern, we have to win a bunch of Senate seats. And to win a bunch of Senate seats, we're going to have to win some very rural areas. And North Carolina has the second most number of rural voters than any state other than Texas. And so when you look at the map of kind of the strategies of Democrats, it's usually been boosting urban turnout and forgetting about the rural areas. And that can work in Michigan because 40% of Michigan's entire population is Detroit. That can work in Georgia because 60% of Georgia's entire population is Atlanta. That can work in Pennsylvania, where 70% of Pennsylvania's entire population is Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. It can't work in North Carolina. Like you add up our top 8 counties where all of our cities are: Buncombe County, where Asheville is; Mecklenburg County here in Charlotte; Forsyth County, where Winston-Salem is; Guilford County, where Greensboro is; Durham County, where Durham is; Wake County, where Raleigh is; Cumberland County, where Fayetteville is; and New Hanover County, where Wilmington is. All 8 of those counties together make up less than 40% of our state. And so we cannot just boost the turnout in our urban areas and expect to win. We have to build a geographic coalition to be able to govern. And that's what's true about this. Again, we want to talk about gerrymandering all the time, but the most effective gerrymander is the U.S. states and the fact that the Senate exists. But the Senate isn't going anywhere, and the Electoral College isn't going anywhere. And if we want it to go somewhere, we have to win. You can't change the rules of the game if you don't control the levers of power. And in order to do that, you have to win. And that means we have to build a geographic coalition. We need to understand that. You know, it's not the team that gains the most yards wins the football game. It's not the team that scores the most baskets win the basketball game. There's a high correlation between that, but that last yard on the football field is worth infinitely more than those other 99 yards. And a 3-pointer is worth more than a 2-pointer. And so the same thing is true in politics. Certain votes count more than others. And if you want to change the rules, you have to win by the current rules. And so I think the Democrats need to take a long look at how we build that geographic coalition, how we build a true big tent that brings a lot of folks together but doesn't alienate any other folks. And I think North Carolina is just such a perfect microcosm of that relationship. We have the western part of the state that's almost exclusively white. We have the eastern part of the state where you hail from. That's very, very, very rural, high rural African-American populations, very racially polarized votings. And then you have the Piedmont Crescent that has very blue cities, but then also very rural exurbs. And so those dynamics are true all over the country. And so I think if we focus on this and focus on North Carolina, and I think this Roy Cooper race is going to be a perfect kind of example of what that can look like, along with our legislative races, it can really be a template for what we can expand. Because again, what works in Michigan, what works in Georgia, what works in Pennsylvania, what works in Virginia doesn't work here. But what works here can be extrapolated out, can be expanded to Missouri, to Ohio, to Iowa. And now all of a sudden we have an actual governing majority in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House where you can actually put some progressive movements forward and show people what happens when you have a government that works for them. Because right now government's broken. We can't get anything through. And when you can't get anything through and one party wants to burn down government and one party wants the government to solve problems, if government doesn't work, the people who want to burn down government seem a little bit more close to home because like, well, the government doesn't work, so let's try something new. And so almost everything hinges on what we can do this year. Because if you want to save democracy, which we all want to, you don't save democracy by telling people how good democracy is. You save democracy by showing people that democracy can work for them. Exactly. And that means that we need to respond to the voters. You can't save democracy if you don't respect democracy. And respecting democracy means you don't get to tell people what they care about. And Democrats need to learn that sooner rather than later if we want to turn the tide on this.
You know, one of the things that really annoyed me during the 2024 campaign was when Donald Trump would say, well, Kamala Harris was vice president for 4 years. Why didn't she do anything about the border? And I'm like, dude, you were president for 4 years. You made this the central theme of your candidacy when you came down that escalator, in 2015. Very famously now in May of 2024, there were reports coming out that Donald Trump was calling his congressional allies, telling them, do not vote for the Republican-written James Langford bill. Right. And this, let's face it, Republicans won on the issue of the border. They convinced the majority of Americans this is a serious issue that has been neglected for years, is out of control, and the Democrats have failed you. Give us power and we'll fix it. Right. Well, they've been given that opportunity, and I understand the argument about the filibuster. But this is let's be honest here, that can literally do anything he wants with this Republican Party. Mm-hmm. He wields power like no other president before him. Not Reagan, not in any kind of comparable figure that had a lot of excitement about him. He could do literally anything he wants. And here we are in 2026, and we're still talking about trying to mitigate the problem through anything but legislative means.
Right.
This is where I get annoyed, because Democrats have an opportunity laid up for them to say they promised to fix something, and they did not fix it.
Right.
They promised to address the border, and they obviously wanted this to continue as a political tool for them to run in the next election on.
Yep.
In your view, why is it that Democrats still seem to be on defense on this issue when they have every reason, in my view, to be on offense? And are Democrats like Roy Cooper taking note, and are they going to actually incorporate and going on offense on this issue? This is let's face it, this is an issue that generates a lot of excitement and attention, and I think it would be political malpractice to simply continue to explain away why the border is not fixed rather than go on the attack.
Right. And I agree. It frustrates me too, and I think we have just a fear from our left flank that if we attack if we talk about the border, if we talk about immigration, we're going to get labeled as xenophobic. And we need leadership to stand up to that. I use a Dumbledore quote a lot of, it takes a lot of courage to stand up to your enemies. It takes a whole lot more to stand up to your friends. It's not really courage, it's leadership. And we really haven't had leadership in a while, because leadership is what brings people together. And we need to do that. Like I was telling everyone, when Doge started, Doge should have been a Democratic idea, because we are the party that wants the government to help people. We are the party that wants a social safety net. And if you want that, then you also have to be the party of just militant accountability. If you are going to be the party that is going to make sure that the government has your back, then you need to be ready to throw the book at anybody who takes advantage of the generosity of the people. And because that's the only way you can do that. Because if you don't do that, then you allow somebody else to weaponize it. And you allow them to weaponize it in a way that they have malicious intents. Versus if we're trying to make the actual process work better, they're trying to tear it down. And so we have to be on the forefront of that. Like for so many things, we think once we pass the bill that things are going to be great. Oh, we passed the infrastructure bill. Things are going to be great. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act. It said inflation reduction in there. So you got to believe us. It's reducing inflation. But you got to go out and you got to keep constantly selling it. It's not enough to govern. You have to sell it. You have to go out and get people to buy into what you're doing and build that base, because that at the end of the day is going to be the only thing that really beats these things. Like you have to have the popular opinion behind you, and you have to have a force of people behind you to know that you are working. And when things aren't working, you need to go to their districts and point out, be like, the reason why this bill hasn't passed is because so-and-so didn't vote for it, is because so-and-so is refusing to do this. And that's how you do it. Like there were so many times when I was running statewide where I would call this just old grizzled white man in Western North Carolina, and every single data point would suggest that he is just a hardcore MAGA guy. And I'd get him on the phone and he'd be like, oh yeah, diehard Democrat. He was like, I'm a Democrat because my dad was a Democrat, and he's a Democrat because his dad was a Democrat, and he's a Democrat because FDR turned on the lights. And like, it's literally just that simple. You have to have, like, COVID gave us an opportunity for a rural renaissance, to really invest in rural areas, provide them with high-speed broadband, give them the infrastructure that they could grow. Because for the first time, people wanted to get the hell out of cities and be able to stay in these rural areas, work remotely, and it should have been a renaissance. But we didn't make those investments. Even in North Carolina, whenever we did a broadband deal, we weren't actually putting pipe in the ground. We were giving AT&T subsidies for them to go out and do it, but then they still had monopoly control over it. And like, that's what people look at, and they see that we're getting screwed. And so we just have to do just the simple blocking and tackling of government. Like, it's not sexy. You're just providing the foundation for people to do it. And so I agree. When people are mad at the border, like, it's a problem. Even Europe is shifting so far to the right because of immigration. Like, you have to understand the problem, and you cannot be oblivious to the problem. And like I said, when the economy's not doing well, people will blame whoever they can for why this is happening. And if the economy's not doing well and people feel like they're being left behind, someone can always point to the border and say, this, immigrants are taking your jobs. Immigrants are why things are worse. Immigrants are why this is. And so you basically need to solve that problem or make the economy better. Like either one of those things can work, but you cannot just stick your head in the sand and feel like the number one issue is something that you don't want to talk about. Like you have to be able to address the issues that voters care about.
Yeah. And look, Wesley, in a moment of transparency, I remember two years ago when I was doing that get out the vote effort in Whiteville, North Carolina, where I grew up. And look, you were not the only Democrat I reached out to. I've reached out to literally every Democrat on the ballot. You are the only one who actually was running for a statewide contest that showed up. And Anderson Clayton, of course, the DNC chair came. God bless her. But this is the thing. You were alluding to the fact that you've got the western, mostly white counties, and that seems to be where all of the energy and resources go. When there's so much opportunity to get folks who barge into the dance, Black voters who come out in large numbers for the Democratic Party, even in election years, let's face it, where voter turnout dips, like in 2024. And for the life of me, I don't understand why there isn't more of a large scale effort to go into counties like Edgecombe County, Halifax County, Warren County, places where the party's base is overwhelmingly Black and historically Democratic. Yep. When I look at the Republican side and you look at Donald Trump, look at the State of the Union, and tell me, who was he like? Was he honestly making an effort to appeal to anyone who did not vote for him, any of the races that he ran for president? It was purely a red meat speech. And that's how the candidates who run on his coattails run. They double down on the MAGA voter. They're not looking to make inroads with anybody who sees from things differently. They are doubling down on who brought them to the dance. And the Democrats seem to be not listening and observing when it comes down to that. Early vote totals in 2024 in those counties I mentioned, Halifax County, Edgecombe County, Warren County, they dropped by tens of thousands compared with 2020. And the result was Donald Trump carrying North Carolina by about 3 points over Kamala Harris. This was a winnable state. So let me ask you this bluntly. Was that a strategic miscalculation by Democrats or a self-inflicted wound that helped hand Republicans the state and set the stage for their momentum heading into 2026?
100%. 100%. And it was and I'll kind of go back to, this has really been our problem since Trump's got elected. I remember after the primary in 2024, we were looking at the map and I told my team, I was like, Don Davis. So Don Davis was running in that northeastern district, which all those counties you mentioned are in that district. I said, if Don Davis wins with 52% of the vote, I don't think a single statewide Democrat's going to lose, because for Don Davis to get that type of vote, you would need basically rural African-American voters to come out in force. And Don Davis won, but he won with 49% of the vote. And that was it. Same thing in Mecklenburg. That first week of early vote, I knew we were in trouble because our African-American parts of our community weren't coming out. And this has been something that's happened since 2016, since Trump got elected, because before, particularly in Mecklenburg is a good example of this, as well as the Northeast. Look at the gubernatorial map of 2008. Look at Bev Perdue's map. Every single county in the East is blue, and it is very blue. And on the federal level, it's a little bit different, but even in Mecklenburg, Mecklenburg's always been, Charlotte's always been a corporate city. And, our Democratic base was always Black voters. But then when Trump got elected, it put the suburbs into play. And we started chasing that white suburban woman, which again was a huge portion of our now base. But we thought that by picking up them, we weren't going to lose anybody else. But for every white woman we picked up, we lost probably half a rural voter and half of a Black voter who chose not to either switch parties or chose to sit at home. And it's because they're very different issue portfolios. Because in the suburbs, things are going great. And if you live in the suburbs, if you're in your gated community, if you live on your country club, you're like, oh, people must be voting for Trump because they're stupid or they're racist. When the reality is people are voting for Trump because they're angry. They feel like they're being left behind. And Trump's anger makes people say, oh, well, this guy gets it. This guy's just as angry as I am. And, I grew up in a very small rural county in the northwestern part, Alexander County, which is probably 80% red. Didn't even have a hospital in it. I had to be born in the county next door. And so we've stopped fostering to that. Like in 2024, we thought abortion was going to be our issue. And it was our issue. We polled high and away on abortion. And if abortion was the number one issue, we would have won everything. The problem was abortion wasn't the number one issue. Abortion wasn't even in the top 5. And even if it was, and this killed us in 2022 as well, because that was when Roe v. Wade went down. And again, in the suburbs, we should run on abortion. I represented a suburban district in Charlotte. My campaign was noun, verb, abortion, Roe v. Wade, protect a woman's right to choose. And every Democrat should protect a woman's right to choose. But that isn't a driver in the rural parts of the state. They're not anti-abortion. Let's get that clear. It's like, I'm not saying we should run candidates who are not for abortion, but that shouldn't be the number one thing they're going out. In 2022, we spent $1 million on state legislative seats in Charlotte and Cabarrus County, which is basically right beside Charlotte. And in doing so, we lost 5 Eastern North Carolina seats. We lost Brian Farkas in Pitt County. We lost Terry Garrison in Vance County. We lost Linda Cooper Suggs in Wilson County. We lost James Galliard in Nash County. And we lost Ricky Hurtado in Alamance County. 4 of those 5 were minority people. And again, it wasn't a great year for Democrats, but the number one thing that we campaigned on nationwide was abortion. The number one issues in those districts were inflation and crime. And we didn't have, and again, those individual candidates didn't really campaign on abortion, but that was the national message. And we didn't have enough ability to break through that. And so we do have to focus on these areas, but we have to understand that our coalition of Democrats care about different things. And what works in the suburbs isn't going to work in the working class areas, because in the suburbs, things are great. And they have the ability to care about social issues and abortion and LGBTQ rights and immigration. But for the folks who are just barely trying to get by, to pay their rent, if they get hit by a car, they're wondering where the closest hospital is going to be, how they're going to pay their bills. Like, those issues seem that it's like Democrats don't care about what I'm going through. And I always say that awful brand that was so effective of Kamala's quote from 2019 talking about transgender surgeries for prisoners. And everyone's like, oh, this is such an anti-trans ad. And it was an anti-trans ad, but the message to normal voters wasn't, the tagline at the end was everything. It was Kamala's for they, them, Trump is for you. And it wasn't an anti-trans ad. It was a Democrats don't care about what you're going through. Democrats care about this issue more than what you're going through. And people aren't anti-trans. They get anti-trans when you think that you're more focused on that than you are about their day-to-day lives. And that's what I think we need to understand. And of course, we took the bait, and we always take the bait, and it drives us off into a debate. They always file these bills like we should vote against them. We should say they're awful. And we should pivot back to the fact that we're the only state in the country that doesn't have a budget, and that prices are going up, and that Trump hasn't done anything to make your life even better. And now put on the fact that we're in a war that's going to implode the entire Middle East. And we just got to have that message discipline of focusing on things that people care about. And we can solve all these issues, but we can't expect voters to care about all these issues. Voters care about their own lives, their own livelihood, and we just got to focus on that. But we got to focus on the folks that brought us here. Like, we cannot win without Black voters, and we need to understand that, and we need to respect that, and we need to focus on these areas to show that we're not just taking them for granted. We're there to actually build relationships and make their lives better.
Right. No, and I really appreciate what you said about message discipline, because I've always said, look, for the average person, abortion, I've talked to Republicans who said, look, as when it pertains to the issue of abortion, I'd rather be able to have everyone mind their business and it be accessible in the case where, that's necessary. Right. But that's not at the forefront of folks' minds. Going back to what I said, Biden had added 775,000 manufacturing jobs. That could have been a T-shirt. 7,000 down, more to go, right?
Yeah.
That could have been something that was succinct, put on a bumper sticker, a T-shirt, a sign, and it seemed like we focused on the things that were so elusive to people, that sort of had an emotional appeal to a certain group and was not tailor specific by region, was not tailor specific by demographic, and that cost Democrats. You look at the fact that unemployment had experienced 27 straight consecutive months
Right.
under President Biden, and no one's talking about that because we act as if that's some information you got to find, in an encyclopedia somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
But these are the numbers that, if let's face it, if a Republican had these numbers, we would have been hearing these numbers on Fox News. We've been hearing them from Joe Rogan. We have been seeing them everywhere. The same way we hear false information, like Donald Trump stops having wars, which is
right. Yeah. I've heard more about the gas in Iowa than I've ever cared to know about, which I know can't possibly be true, but it is. Yeah.
And you referred to Don Davis throughout the conversation. The newly redrawn 1st Congressional District puts Democrat Don Davis directly in the crosshairs. When you look at other states, like for instance in Texas, you see older statesmen, more seasoned Democratic congressmen running against younger, Democratic challengers because they've redrawn these maps so strategically to ensure that Democratic representation is reduced and Republican representation is maximized.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at how they've redrew the map in North Carolina, what are some of the similarities you see with how they've redrawn the maps in Texas? And also, if Democrats lose the seat that Don Davis is running for, what's the real explanation? Is it the map, the message, or the ground game?
I mean, in this situation, I think it's mostly the map because they drew that map for one sole purpose. But in order to do that, in order to make his district more Republican, they had to make District 3 a little bit less Republican. There's a great guy, a good friend of mine, Raymond Smith, who I served with in the legislature. He's running for that one against Greg Murphy, and so and Laurie Buchholz's running again. And Laurie Buchholz has a very problematic record that Don Davis was really able to capitalize on in 2024. And so Don's going to fight hard. And I think with this wave, I think there's an opportunity that he can hold on to that. It's certainly going to be harder. And if he loses, I think it's going to be 100% the map. But it's, I'm not one of the Democrats who likes to talk about gerrymandering because I feel we have a lot of issues, and talking about gerrymandering makes it seem that like everything we say is super popular. It's just these pesky maps are why we aren't in control. And that's not true. Because we have to build a geographic coalition. And so while these maps are awful, and I think we do need fair maps, and I'm going to be fighting to make sure we get our Supreme Court justices elected so we can strike down these blatant partisan gerrymanders. But it's packing and cracking. And so which again, Democrats make it so much easier on ourselves because we're so tightly isolated in terms of our little urban pockets. Because it's really easy to concentrate Democrats in one small area and make it so there is 80-90% Democratic districts while there's only 60-70% Republican districts. But by doing so, Republicans make themselves very, very, very vulnerable to a wave election. Because to spread out their numbers that much, that means they really do have to lower it to about 55-60% of the vote, which in a normal election, a Republican's going to win easily. But if it's a wave election and you've got great Democrats running all over the place, you can break through that. You're not going to be able to hold them long term, but you can break it through and get some really big majorities in Congress and do some great pieces of legislation. And that's how you move the ball forward. But it forces us. Again, we can complain about it, and I think we should do the work to make sure we can end this and do nonpartisan redistricting. But I also think it's an issue that voters don't really care about. It's very in the weeds, and it should force us to build a geographic coalition. That doesn't mean moderate. It means understand the geography of different areas of like Charlotte, Union County, Gaston County, all those areas. They're just very different places. And you have to have candidates that understand those communities because they are very different communities. Like there are reasons some areas are very Republican, and there are reasons some areas are very Democratic. And so, you're not going to, I don't think you beat gerrymandering by talking about gerrymandering. You beat gerrymandering by winning. And you win by getting a strong bench of people all over the place and coming with a youth movement. I think that's something that is positive, because, you do need folks who are energetic and really to go up there and fight. But at the same time, you need people who are going to be effective. And I think that's the difference of, we have this situation now where a lot of politics is celebrity, and the celebrity politicians don't ever really get much done. And so, you want somebody like, a good example is David Price, who served the triangle for the longest time. He was one of the old white guys, but he was also the smartest guy in the room, in every room he walked into. And he was able to get so much done. I don't think he ever made a single video. And so, it's like, because Congress is a job, and working in Congress is a job, and getting legislation through is a job. The same thing true in Raleigh. The legislators you hear from most of the time really don't get that much done, because you have to build relationships across the aisle and work things through. And if you want to get something done, odds are you can't have your name on it, and you can't have a Democrat's name on it. But that's how it is until you win. And the best politicians are ones who can get that done in the door, and then as soon as they walk outside, it's back to war again. And realize that it's not personal in that regard. It's politics. It's trying to get power. It's trying to get these things done. And so I think we do need some younger folks to run. I was only 32 when I ran for the first time for the state legislature, and was able to win. And I'm still under 40, barely, which puts me in I feel older, but it puts me still in the very younger quintile of politicians in North Carolina. But I think we are seeing a boost of young energy coming up to really want to make a government that works for its people. And I'm excited for what opportunities that's going to bring in the future.
I want to ask you about Senate Leader Phil Berger,
Yep.
Who's been one of the most powerful figures
Yep.
in North Carolina state politics for years. With the pressure he's facing now, is this his high watermark, or just another moment that he survives and come back stronger in your view?
Well, I certainly think it's his high watermark. I still am really hopeful that he's going to lose. There are more provisional ballots in Rockingham County than there are in Guilford, and Rockingham went overwhelmingly for his opponent, which should say something since that's his home county. But it's his high watermark. He spent $10 million on this race. He literally pulled every single lobbyist from Raleigh, every member of the Senate to come out and stump for him. And there's blood in the water now, and people aren't going to back behind someone who's going to be that vulnerable. And so I think this is going to be his last hurrah. If he does pull it off, he is going to be damaged. He has bottomed out the Senate caucus money with how much money he spent on his own race in a year where they're going to need a lot of money to defend this entire state. And so I think that puts their entire caucus in a rough position. And, people don't follow a wounded leader. And so I think you're going to start seeing a scamper for who's going to be next in line, and people are going to start trying to distance themselves from Berger in the Senate. And so if he does lose, I think it's going to be a wild short session in the General Assembly this year for the rest of this year. And it is going to be just a seismic shift in political power in North Carolina, because I don't think there's been a more powerful president pro tem of the Senate. Not certainly in my lifetime. Obviously, some of the Democrats have been pretty powerful in their own right, but what Phil Berger's been able to do since 2011 has been really, really impressive for just the accumulation of power and getting everything his way. And so I'm very hopeful this is the end of the Berger dynasty, and we can start getting a much better state government at hand.
This Republican Party constantly shows itself to be tone deaf when it comes down to the ultimate themes in this upcoming election. Look, I remember Joni Ernst saying, all of us will die, very callously, very callously, in response to a legitimate question about the impacts and the implications that the one big beautiful bill that they through both chambers of Congress and passed on the 4th of July this past summer will have on average, Americans, many of whom voted for them. And then she doubled down with a TikTok video,
right?
That said, she also thought she didn't have to explain the tooth fairy. I mean, and then you couple that with Donald Trump saying affordability is old-fashioned term. And Democrats have somehow taken this term, and it's, he's kind of making it seem like it's an alien term of art that Democrats are just using to muster up votes, as opposed to actual concern that many people have. But you look at some of the implications of this bill: work requirements for Medicaid and SNAP benefits fully phased, into the months between January of this year and June, for the fiscal year that we're currently in. You have cuts to Medicare, 4% across spending, unless Congress waives this particular cut. And then you have tax cuts expire if they're not extended, with no entitlements being part of the calculation here. So the midterms could enable GOP reconciliation for more cuts to these programs. And what are the implications for rural North Carolina? I tell people all the time, it sounds like this is some abstract, complicated stuff, but when you actually think about it, when someone's having a wife in labor, or someone has an elderly parent that needs hospice care or nursing home care, all of a sudden it becomes more real.
Right. And that's the reality of it. And politically, the difficult part is no one needs the government until they need the government. And no one needs that. And so, we're like, as I say, we like to campaign a lot on altruism as if the government's a charity, and it's not a charity. And so like exactly what you said, we have to bring these points home to folks of, listen, this isn't hurting somebody who's an other. This isn't hurting somebody that doesn't live close to you, that isn't in the community. This is hurting you. This is having real impacts on you. One of my biggest frustrations when we were trying to expand Medicaid in North Carolina, our number one talking point was 600,000 people are going to get insurance. 600,000 people are going to get insurance. This is for these 600,000 people who don't have insurance, these poor people that don't have insurance. And the reality is there's 11 million people in North Carolina, meaning that 10,400,000 people aren't affected by Medicaid. And so that's a very small sliver of the populace, when the reality is, and again, it is good for those reasons. Those people deserve insurance. But Republicans are saying that, this is going to bust our budget. And if it busts our budget, you're going to get hurt. We're going to go bankrupt, and you're going to get hurt from that. When we should have been selling it of, altruism's good, but people are self-interested. Government isn't charity. They're self-interested taxpayers. It is their money. And we should have been saying, you're already paying for the uninsured person. If someone is uninsured and they have a stroke or have an aneurysm or something, they go to the doctor, they go to the emergency room, they're stabilized, they're treated, they get a giant bill, they get pushed into bankruptcy, and those costs get passed on to you. Literally nobody wins from someone not having insurance and having to go to the doctor, versus you give people insurance, you get them to go to the doctor, give them preventative care, give them regular checkups, everybody's healthcare cost goes down. And so I think that's one of the things, when we talk about this big, beautiful bill and the impacts of it, is just the day-to-day impacts of everybody's individual lives. So it's really going to hurt these people. But listen, you should care about this, because that also hurts you too. You want to lower crime, help people be more economically secure. You want to lower your healthcare cost, make sure people have insurance and that they actually go to the doctor and consume healthcare in a much more efficient way. You want good schools, make sure that your state and your county aren't having to fund bills that they can't afford. Make sure your state is doing their job. Make sure the federal government is doing their job. Bring everything back home to be even though directly this may not impact you, the second level, it absolutely does impact you. And so we're all in this together. You can't just ignore those folks and just say, "Oh, well, that's happening to them. It's not happening to me." We don't live in a vacuum like that. It's all tied together, and these have real material impacts on your day-to-day life that you're going to notice and that you're going to feel, and we need to drive that home again and again and again.
And before we close, talk about Mecklenburg County for a minute. Charlotte is becoming a booming city. It's becoming younger, more diverse. But the rest of the state still has a lot of rural counties and smaller towns, like the one I grew up in Columbus County. Where do Democrats actually win or lose in North Carolina, and how do they turn the tide?
Yeah, and so it's a tale of Morgan Jackson always says this when he's talking about his statewide campaigns. It's a tale of two states. On the surface, North Carolina looks purple, and it does, but it's there's red North Carolina and there's blue North Carolina. And so the avenue for us to win is we do need to run up the score in blue North Carolina, and that's Charlotte, that's the Triangle, that's out west in Buncombe County, down around Wilmington, and then some of our high African American rural areas like the Black Belt. You're talking about the northeastern part, even Columbus County. We've lost Robeson County for a generation because Trump has federally recognized the Lumpies, and so we're never getting Robeson County back in my lifetime. But we need to run up the scores in the areas that were good, and those are younger, educated areas by focusing on what we need. But then we also need to start lowering the margin in some of these exurban areas and these rural areas. Like, we can't just count on population growth, because that's literally a sign of, like, that literally says to rural areas, we're literally just waiting for you to die or for us to outnumber you so we don't have to listen to you. And Obama, when he won North Carolina in 2008, he won because he won more rural votes than any Democrat since Jimmy Carter for president. And he won that on an economic populist message. And so you can't just rely on the cities, and you can't rely on demographics or destiny. You have to continuously build that coalition, because coalitions are not static. There is a different Democratic Party now than there was when Obama was first elected. And so you have to be flexible. If you are still running on the same playbook that you were even 2 elections ago, you're a dinosaur. You're a fossil. You're out of the game. And so you have to be constantly adaptable and constantly looking for your wedge to kind of change, and your coalition to change. And so because you're constantly going to be losing folks and building folks as issues change, as things change. And so you have to have a nimble party. And so I think that is one of the big things. Like, Mecklenburg has historically low voter turnout compared to the rest of North Carolina. And that's, as chair of the party, that is my number one goal. That's my number one task. That's what I go to sleep thinking about. That's what I wake up thinking about, of how to solve that. And because if we're able to do that, it frees up so many resources. As I said, in 2024, 6 Democrats won statewide, including Allison Riggs, but they had to outspend their opponents by an exorbitant amount of money. Because every statewide Democrat, they were not running as a generic Democrat. They were running as, I'm a different type of Democrat. They were chasing every single unaffiliated voter to break their way. And unaffiliated voters are not reliable voters down ballot. They zig and they zag based on who they want, because they are the real purple voters. And so a lot of that is because a lot of our base voters, like you just said, like our African-American population in the Northeast, particularly in Mecklenburg, our African-American population didn't turn out. And so you had to have all that money to chase every single unaffiliated voter statewide. But if we're able to lift that up in Mecklenburg and in the eastern part of the state, it frees up so many resources for our statewide candidates that we don't have to spend that much money winning these statewide races. And like you said in your intro, what's more powerful, the governor or the legislature? The legislature. We have the most powerful legislature in the country, and we have the least powerful governor statutorily in the country. Our legislature is all powerful, but we spend 99% of our campaign finance money on our statewide races that literally have no power for the most part. And that leaves pennies for us to actually invest in our legislative races. And so the future of the Democratic Party in North Carolina is getting our base voters out in our urban areas and then focusing on these legislative races, because those are the candidates that can localize their message, tell them what Democrats stand for. Because at the end of the day, Democrats stand for opportunity. We are the party that believes in people. We are the party that wants to invest in our communities. We are the party that wants to invest in our people and make sure that they have every opportunity to succeed. And that message will work in every single corner of this state. We just have to have the resources to focus it. And you can't do that with just one single statewide race. You have to do that with legislative candidates running in every single corner of this state. And so that is my dream for what I hope we can do in the next 6 years going up to 2030, 2032, is really make it so that a generic Democrat can win statewide. And then we can focus all of our time and energy on building that geographic coalition so that we can govern, and that we can transform to every other state in the country. And that can really be a rebirth of, a modern New Deal for the Democratic Party, of a party that has just geographic appeal across the country and can govern everywhere, a true Big Tent party. And so that's my dream, and that's what I hope that North Carolina and Mecklenburg County in particular can do for the Democratic Party going forward.
I have to ask, for those who may be unfamiliar with the recent election, judicial election, in which the Republicans refused to concede and cost the actual legitimate winner months of not being able to take her seat. Could you explain what went, the dynamics behind that race, the implications for it moving forward for future judicial races in 2026 and beyond, and the close margins? Because a lot of times we don't stress enough how these close margins have consequential, tangible impacts as it pertains to key judicial rulings pertaining to voting rights and the electoral maps. And also, if you can also touch on whether you believe that if the Democrats get the majority in the legislature, should they follow what California and what Virginia have been doing in redrawing maps to counter what Republicans are doing in states like Louisiana and states like Mississippi and states like Texas?
Yeah. And so, in terms of the margin, like you got to win big. You got to remove all doubt. And really what saved us for the Allison Riggs race, so Jefferson Griffin tried to throw out, X number of thousand votes and that were legally cast. And what saved us was that the court said, you're literally changing the rules of the election after the election's already happened. And you can't do that. Even the conservatives said you can't do that. The problem is now an election isn't happening. And they can literally go through and do all that stuff. And so we're in the process of repairing all those. But again, it takes work. It takes work to go out there and make sure people's registrations are correct. You can't do anything. Again, elections have consequences. If you lose elections, you're at the will of what these Republican judges and these Republican legislators wants to do. And it makes life a hell of a lot harder, but you have to respond to that. They may be successful this time. And so if they are successful, you have a lot of our attorneys that are ready to go trying to fight it in court. But we need to understand there's a very fair chance we're going to lose that court battle. And so we need to be ready with our organization on the ground to go out and finding these folks, making sure they have voter ID, making sure that their IDs are correct, making sure that they have all the information that there is on there. And so, but again, it's all a moot point if we increase these margins. Again, like I think of it as like if you leave it down to a college kicker kicking a 55-yard field goal as time expires to win the game, you'll really hope they're going to make it. But if they miss it, it's their fault. But we shouldn't have been in that position anyway. It shouldn't have come down to a last-second kick. We should have been winning by 10. We should have been winning by 20. And that's the mindset we have to have. Like, we need to do what we can to win by these numbers, but also we need a hell of a kicker so that we can trust on them at the end. And that's where our organization comes to play, of making sure that we're out there and doing the work that we need to do to get it done. And so, I'm nervous about it, but we got to get these folks elected, and we just got to go out there and we got to do the work. And in terms of, if we get control of the Supreme Court is going to strike down these maps. Like they struck them down in 2018. And that's what I said. I don't like to harp on gerrymandering that much, because we had better maps in 2020 than we did in 2018. And we lost 5 legislative seats. We had better maps in 2022 than we had in 2020. And we lost legislative seats. And we lost the court. And that's when they were able to gerrymander again. And so when we get our court back, they can strike these down and we will get a fair map. Hopefully the House has a chance to flip by 2030, and we're not going to have full control. So we're not going to be able to do what California did, but we can bring it to the table and have fairness. But I think California should do it. Gerrymandering has to be mutually assured destruction. If one party is playing by the rules and the other party isn't, there's literally zero penalty for the Republicans. Republicans have to hurt from gerrymandering. Like they have to hate it as much as we do, because if they're the only people doing it, then, we draw fair maps and we give them, we would have had a majority in the legislature in 2022 had New York Supreme Court not ungerrymandered their maps. And like, had that happened, I think Republicans would have been like, okay, we need to solve this problem. But we didn't. And so like, it has to be, you don't unilaterally disarm as bad as it is, but you need to have strategic disarmament through treaties. And that's what independent redistricting on the federal level does. Because if you do it state by state, you're benefiting them. You're giving them seats when they're not giving you any seats. And so there has to be penalties for it on both sides if we ever want to come to an actual solution for it. So I got no problems with what California is doing, because you gotta, there's a tit for tat situation going on here. It's bad for democracy, it's bad for everybody, but it's also the only strategy that I think will ultimately lead us to a better outcome.
And the last question I have, Wesley, we talked about the judge's decision to halt early voting among North Carolina college campuses. When you tell a 19-year-old at North Carolina A&T State University or University of North Carolina at Greensboro, they've got to leave campus to vote, do you think that discourages them, or does it actually mobilize them politically? Because it encourages them to actually go against those who are trying to restrict them from exercising their right to vote.
And it's it's a little bit of both. Like when I lived on campus, I didn't have a car, and so going off campus was difficult. Also, I went to Chapel Hill for undergrad, and so I kept my voter registration in Iredell County because I figured Chapel Hill has enough Democrats. Iredell County could use a few more, so I always voted by mail. But it could go both ways. It could, like the average voter who's just like like if I'm walking by and I see the voting place, I'll go in. Like that'll lower them. But like the activist, it'll if you feel like something is being taken away from you, you'll want it just a little bit more. And so I think it is something that can help mobilize our youth vote. And again, that's usually what ends up happening. If like it would have been so easy for the Trump administration to remain in power, but they were just sheer incompetent during COVID, and they went too far. And that's usually what happens is you get overreach from one party due to hubris, and that energizes a base of people who are just angry. And I think that's what's happening now. Of like not only everything going on, because again, say what you will about the first Trump administration, as bad as things were, the economy was pretty good, and people weren't getting murdered on the street. And both of those things are off the table now. And so that's why I think we're going to have a much better year this year than 2018. But we have to take advantage of that. And so we got to harness that frustration, show people that, again, the whole saying is that if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't be trying to take it away from you. And they wouldn't be trying to make it hard to galvanize these people particularly if you want young people to do something, tell them they can't do it. And they're much more likely to go out and do it. Hell, I'm almost 40 and that still works for me. And so I think it works both ways. So it certainly does make it harder for them to vote. But if we utilize it the right way, we can really, we can wake the sleeping giant, which in American politics, the sleeping giant is the youth vote. And if we're able to harness that in anger, they're going to rue the day that they tried to take that right to vote away from folks.
So tonight, one thing is clear. What happens in North Carolina rarely stays in North Carolina. From the high-stakes Senate clash between Michael Whatley and Roy Cooper to the fight over the nearly drawn 1st District seat held by Don Davis to the debate over student access to the ballot at campuses like North Carolina A&T State University, University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and Western Carolina University, this state is revealing how power is being contested in modern American politics. The questions we explored tonight about maps, turnout, and who truly gets a voice in the process aren't just North Carolina questions. They're American questions. And as the road to 2026 continues to unfold, the decisions made here may tell us not just who wins elections, but how democracy itself is practiced in the years ahead. Thank you so much for what you brought to the table, Wesley Harris. This has been a rich and very insightful discussion, a much needed one. And I'm forever grateful. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
And keep up the fight in Mecklenburg County. We need you. We thank you for all your efforts and what you're doing there to turn out the vote and to educate people in the process. With that being said, that's going to conclude tonight's episode of the Political Mike Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike Podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.